Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk about music albums and how their quality has actually decreased a little bit starting in the 1990s. There's probably many reasons for this, but I think the big ones are actually a format switch from vinyl, the dominant album format being a 12-inch, 33 RPM vinyl, over to a compact disc, a CD, and how the switch to this CD format and all of its advantages over the vinyl format actually negatively impact the quality of albums. Now, albums like this, these big 12-inch affairs, these really became a thing in the 1960s. And indeed, this album is from the 1960s. Before that, you really have a dominance of a couple of different size formats, but the big one is probably the 45 RPM single. So singles tended to be what people listen to. They listen to them on a jukebox. People tended to collect them. So somebody asked me live, can you do a tier list of like Elvis albums? It's like the albums are not that relevant until we start to get to the 1960s and people start to collect these larger format discs running at 33 RPMs that can hold a lot of music and have this idea of like a complete artistic snapshot, a complete artistic work that is the album that's maybe equivalent of like a book rather than individual songs like singles. So starting in the 60s, you really get the emergence of the album as a format. And it's the main format, and this is the main media that you get it on, the 12-inch vinyl disc, all the way up through the end of the 1980s when we have a switch over to CD. Now, when we switch over to CD, we have a couple of important things. The first and biggest one is that you're no longer as limited on time. A single CD can hold almost 80 minutes worth of music with standard manufacturing procedures. I think newer CDRs can actually hold a total of 80 minutes, but back then you were practically limited to about 78 minutes versus 46 minutes for your standard LP. And that 46 minutes had to be split into two 23-minute halves max. So the way that you formatted your album had a lot to do with the limitations of the vinyl format. So you had to pick 46 minutes or less of songs to put on your album. Otherwise, you were going to balloon it into two-disc album like the White Album. There's lots of two-disc albums. Two-disc albums are really, really common now in the digital age because bands tend to make longer albums because they're really working with the CD format and then putting it onto vinyl, and so you end up with these larger, two-disc affairs to get all of the music actually crammed onto the smaller vinyl format. But if you were just going to release a single disc, that length limit had some effects on what you were going to do. So first of all, you couldn't just release as much music as you wanted to. You had to select which 40 minutes you were going to release. So what most bands did is they had their 12-inch, which had all of their best songs that they were recording at that particular time. Then if there were songs left over, those would end up being B-sides on the 45 RPM single, or as part of maybe an EP. You may have a 10-inch EP. That's a weird format that I'm not really going to talk about in this video, but the singles were the big thing. So like, Motorhead might go into the studio and they'd record 12 or 14 songs. 8 or 9 of them would end up on the album, the LP, and then you'd have maybe 4 or 5 extra tracks. So they'd release some singles, and those would be the B-side. So you had an A-side and a B-side, one song on one side, usually one song, maybe 2 songs on the other side of a single, depending on what size format they were using for the single. RPMs were still, 45 RPM discs were still very popular for a long time, even while you had maybe the co-dominance of the 10-inch single and the 10-inch EP. But you'd have them as a B-side. So those extra songs were like little bonus songs that you got when you bought the singles. And what you kind of end up happening there is that if you have 40 minutes and you can only select 40 minutes for your main product, your album, you're going to try to select the best 40 minutes. So you'll notice albums from the 70s and 80s that are only 8 tracks. Those 8 tracks are really good. And even if you decide I'm only going to record 8 tracks, like some of the Metallica albums in the 80s, I'm only going to record 8 tracks. Well, you focus more on those 8 tracks than you would if you were doing 12 tracks. Remember, you only have so much time, you only have so much focus. If you're in there like, we're going to make these 8 songs as good as they can possibly be, and you're very focused on making those good and improving the material, improving your performance of the material, the end result is going to be a better product on the other side when you actually come out with your 12-inch album. So the shorter length causes a little bit more focus, and therefore the average quality of the songs tends to be higher. There's also something about the fact that albums can't easily skip tracks. Now you can look at an album and maybe you can see on this one in the light, you can see you can see where the individual tracks start. So you could drop your needle in between those tracks and skip around. But it's a little bit more cumbersome than just pressing next, just putting your CD in and just pressing next if you don't like the track. So you have to physically move the needle around. So the way that people listened to albums was different than in the CD era. So when you put on an album, you listen to the whole side and then you flipped it over and you listen to the whole other side. And that's the way you listen to albums. In fact, one of the reasons I like LPs is that I listen to one side and then I have to get up and listen to the other side. I'm more engaged with the music, and the songs have to flow together and be of a high quality and also have to be contrasting with each other. You notice that there's a format for certain records in the high album era of like the 70s and 80s where you have maybe an attention-grabbing, energetic first track. You maybe have a little bit longer, more, I guess a little bit more intricate second track. You have a change-up track with number 3 and 4, maybe like a ballad if it's a rock band, or just something different that happens towards the end of that A side. And then the B side, again, you're going to have a little bit more variety. So as somebody's listening to an entire side of a disc, you want to have a lot of variety of songs because they're listening to all of them one after the other. Now, this changes when you get to the CD because, first of all, you're not in 46-minute length divided into two 23-minute halves. You have close to 80 minutes. So if you record 12 or 14 songs, you can put all of them on the CD. You put all of them on the CD. Everything you recorded can fit on the CD. So you're no longer filtering and picking the best 8 songs. You're just putting all the songs on the album. And because when it comes to singles with CDs, it costs the same to manufacture a CD single as it does to manufacture a CD. There's not a lot of reason to release CD singles except to try to milk your fan base a little bit more than you did before. So you just have singles basically disappear in the 90s and you just have these. Likewise, because you can just skip around, there's the assumption that if you buy a CD and you don't like a track, you just skip it. A bad track doesn't disturb the listening experience that much because you just press that next button and go on to the next track of the album and you're good to go. So what happens in the 1990s? Almost universally, almost every band starts to produce worse albums in the 1990s. Whether it's a metal band or it's a pop band or something else, they start to include more songs. So when Metallica went from having 9 songs on an album to having 12, the quality dropped. And when they went to having 14, 13, quality dropped again. So every song number past 8 that they've had on an album has reduced the quality of the album. If they picked 8 songs and really focused on those, they would have had an even higher quality album. Like Black Album is 12 tracks. But if it had been just 8 tracks, the 8 best tracks, and they'd focused even more on those 8 tracks, it would have been like one of the best. I mean, it's already, in a lot of people's mind, one of the best albums ever released, but it would have been that much better, I think, as an album to listen to. So I think audiences also start to pick up habits. So a lot of kids in the 90s, when I was growing up, they didn't buy a CD with the idea here are 12 good songs. They bought it with this CD has a song I like on it, and maybe it'll have a couple other songs I like on it. So they buy it and they just skip around and maybe they like 3 or 4 songs on the album. To me, that's not good. That's not a high quality listening experience. I paid $12, $13 for the CD. I would really like to have a lot of good quality on there. So I remember lots of bands that I bought that were 90s bands, just the albums were terrible. They might have had 1 or 2 good songs on the album and the rest were garbage. And I think record companies knew this. They knew that people would skip around and they knew that they could just have 1 good hit single and then people would buy 12 songs worth of material. It costs the same to sell a single as to sell an album, so you might as well just sell the album, as many as possible. The album, get the sales charts up there, pump all of that up. Well, we got a lot of crap albums in the 1990s, even from bands that were otherwise good in the 1980s. Pretty much across the board, that's something that happened. Megadeth's got worse. We're talking metal bands. Iron Maiden started having too many songs on an album. I think that's actually affected the overall quality of their albums ever since the 80s. There's just 3 or 4 songs too many, which reduces that focus. puts songs on the album that maybe aren't as good as the others, and just makes the album listening experience not quite as good as it used to be. This is one of the things I also happen to like about a band like Darkthrone. I don't have a Darkthrone album handy, but they tend to have an old school mentality. They'll release an album with just 6 really good songs on it. Great. Imagine trying to release an album now with 6 songs, like most, or in the 90s. In the 90s, they'd be like, this is only 6 songs. This isn't even a full album. Why would I buy this? Whereas you had plenty of albums in the 70s that maybe had 6 songs. 2112 had, I think, 5 songs. Rainbow Rising, one of the best rock records ever recorded, had 6 songs on it, a whopping 6 songs. Now, those 6 songs were really good, and a lot of them were long songs as well, but only 6 songs on that album. Trying to do that in the 1990s would have been like, no, we want 12. It's the perception of value. You pick it up and there's 12 songs, and you're like, there's going to be something on there I like. There's probably some value. But is there value? To me, it's much better to listen to 8 good songs than 12 songs of mediocre quality with maybe 2 good songs. I like to listen to entire albums, so I'd much rather have the entire album be high quality. And by the way, this one actually is. This is Within by Wuthering Heights. This is their first album. And I actually have a lot of affection for it. This is another thing about albums, just an aside. Look at the difference in the size, right? This album art is really cool, but it's so small. It's so small. Whereas this is big and it's not even cool. It's just like a kind of a picture of the band, right? And then like another picture of the band on the back. If you have really good art and it's huge, wow, it looks really cool. It's really cool to be able to look at that really big as you listen to the album and look at the artwork. I've talked about this in like why vinyls are good. One of the reasons has nothing to do with the sound quality at all. It has to do with the fact that the art's big and that you sit down and listen to the whole thing all the way through. And that tends to make a better listening experience than skipping tracks around in your car as you drive around in the 1990s. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think down below. That's one of the reasons that I think albums as a whole have gotten lower quality. Even if you get better production quality, things get a little bit worse. There's another thing there that I think it would probably be like a Rick Beato thing, which is that like as you get more ability to make perfect production, you lose some energy that existed in the analog era. But that would be a completely different discussion. Mostly this is about how the format really changes the way that you focus and the way that you make a product, and then it actually decreases the quality of the overall product. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time.